The dark robes of CERN. I've told this to a select few. And while creepiest/scariest is subjective, in the context of my life, it truly is the creepiest and scariest unsolved mystery, well until the CERN video sacrifice was posted online. I was an assistant of a visiting physicist at CERN. On the CERN campus they have dorms and rooms where special visitors can sleep if they want to. I arrived ahead of the professor, for now for legal reasons let's just call him the professor. I was sleeping over at one of the special rooms. I must say there is a good view of the campus grounds, and one could almost say everything from the way the buildings were built to where each window would faces, was well almost symbiotic of something. I was watching a movie in the main room when I suddenly got a phone call. I watched myself in the reflection of the main window, as I listened to what was being said on the other line. I watched as emotion poured over my face as I threw the phone across the room. It was as if I was standing beside myself, or outside of my body. After moments of crying, it hit me that the professor had died in a plane accident. They were still searching for the plane. Thinking to myself as I poured myself a drink, I could have been on that flight, and I could have died with him. I decided to go out and go for a walk. The grounds at CERN are dimly lit. The year was roughly 2015. I was new to the assisting thing. Walking around CERN at night reminded me of the walks I would take through the big cemetery that was near my house, as a kid. It was behind the train tracks. I loved the danger of the cemetery. The scares. Back then we were kids. It was a rite of passage. As I walked along the sidewalks, leading to the center of CERN, I stopped. To this day, I can't explain why. I had walked into the center dozens of times to see the Lord Shiva statue, and on scarier nights. For whatever reason, I didn't want to go in there. I don't know if the thought of death on my mind due to the professor or perhaps. Regardless, without really thinking anything I stopped, turned around, and decided to head down a nearby sidewalk. Now, in retrospect, I do have to say that throughout this walk, things seemed off. There wasn't a car in sight. This was an active, busy place. Even walking through what I called Main Street was odd because there just weren't any guards. Odd. It was roughly after midnight. It was a weekend night. Where was everybody? Perhaps just a strange coincidence. Lastly, there was something in the air. I made a note of it in my notes for the day. I wrote, "It feels weird tonight. The air. The lights." So I decided to walk down a dead-end sidewalk. At the end of the sidewalk was a ditch with a simple up, down, and up trail that led to the sidewalk that of the building that I was staying at. Simple enough. Keep in mind, as I get into the horrifying part of this story, I was on the CERN campus. These weren't old, creepy houses with strange individuals. And the trees were small. It wasn't a brand new development, but it wasn't that old either. This part of CERN has only been here for about 20 years. So as I walking down this street, I met another odd-looking person named Edward. We started to talk about the stars and the world. It was like I had knew him all of my life, looking down to the road beneath our feet as we talk. I don't remember the exact conversation at this particular moment. Perhaps we were talking about the tragedy of that night. But it could just have easily been about what was on the breakfast menu at CERN for the next day. As we approached the dead end, which was a few buildings away, Edward and I suddenly stopped. We did so at the same time without saying one word to each other. Our heads slowly turned towards each other, both sensing something. The hair on our arms and backs of our necks standing high. Then our gaze slowly moved forward in unison, slightly to the right. That's when we saw it. About 2 buildings away, in a virtually barren front yard of one of the dorms, besides some bushes, was a dark figure. It was someone or something in dark robes. No face. No features at all. Just the robe. Now, this figure didn't acknowledge us. Not yet. It instead walked or moved in a certain way. I can't articulate it correctly. As if it was walking in circles slowly, without really walking. It held something that was blowing in the wind. And yes, the wind picked up a little bit as well. Another odd element was the light that illuminated it somewhat. There was a street light a few buildings up, but it wasn't strong enough to illuminate this figure as it was. Edward and I were frozen. In fact, I'm almost frozen as I write this. It's been a while since I have thought about this night. So there we stood, frozen in fear, staring at this dark figure moving, yet doing so without moving. And it was holding something. Or perhaps what was blowing in the wind was more of its robe. I'm not sure. We stared at this thing, for I don't know how long, until it stopped and suddenly looked up at us, as if finally alarmed by our presence. That was enough for us. We ran away as fast as we could. We cut through a side street that was to lead us to a parallel street towards my building. This street led to a slight hill. As we rounded the corner and started running up the hill in a panic, we stopped. Because on top of that hill, we saw another dark figure with its arms raised. We turned around and ran away in the direction of my building, which at this distance was at least 5 miles away. As we ran, Edward did something funny. He pulled out a pocket watch and checked the time. It was as if time stood still. The next thing I remember, we're lying in the middle of a courtyard of some other group of buildings that I had never been in, gasping for breath. We sat up and without saying a word, we walked in silence back to my room. The air felt normal again. Although we felt like we were in a haze of sorts. Albeit out of danger. I fell asleep in my room. I woke up that morning and Edward must have left. There was no trace of him. No evidence of our walk that night. A few days later, as I was leaving CERN, I asked around if I could find Edward. Sadly, the only Edward they knew about committed suicide suddenly a few years ago. I thought of this night as few times. I thought of returning to that site. I thought of the odd coincidence of unexpected and surprising death, just like my professor that night. Is there a connection? Were we seeing some future fate for one of us? Was this all some dual hallucination, in my mind? No way. Or did I walk with a ghost named Edward, whom walked with the men in black robes that roam the grounds of CERN at night? Stay paranoid, my friends.